the for Calgary-Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my pleasure to rise today to move second reading of Bill 19, the Reform of Agencies, Boards and Commissions Compensation Act. The purpose of this proposed legislation is to address consistency and fairness in executive compensation levels for the public agencies, boards and commissions, also known as ABCs, that are subject to the Alberta Public Agencies Governance Act. Mr. Speaker, Alberta's public agencies play an important role adjudicating, managing, and delivering innovative programs and services on behalf of government. As such, they form a significant part of Alberta's public sector. However, these same agencies also account for a substantial portion of government spending on salaries. And compensation arrangements that are funded by public dollars need to be in line with the broader Alberta public sector and comparable jurisdictions. That's why our government is taking action. We are focused and we are determined to increase both the transparency and consistency in how executives of provincial agencies are compensated. Mr. Speaker, the 2016 speech from the throne signaled this government's intent to introduce enabling legislation to address the growing divergence in compensation practices between some public agencies and the core public service.
Hear, hear.
The legislation before the House today is therefore a key deliverable in our government's commitment to Albertans. This legislation is meant to address the wide variance in the compensation philosophies, levels and practices that currently exist in our ABCs. With the divergence between some agencies and the broader public sector having grown over a considerable period of time, the time for action is now. Now is the time to begin the hard work of creating a consistent framework for executive compensation across our ABCs.
Agreed.
Doing so is consistent with similar actions taken by other jurisdictions, including British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia. And it is consistent with the recommendations of previous Auditor General reports that government provide direction on executive compensation practices for senior executives in our ABCs. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. This legislation will accomplish a number of items. First, it authorizes the establishment of compensation frameworks for designated public agencies and designated executives governed under the Alberta Public Agencies Governance Act, or APEGA. If this proposed legislation is passed, over the course of the summer, the government will be contracting professional benchmarking compensation firm to provide guidance on a rigorous and transparent set of frameworks for executive compensation. The government will also be reaching out to ABCs and the general public for feedback on the compensation philosophy that will guide these frameworks. Mr. Speaker, I urge all Albertans and all members of this House to share your thoughts with the government through the online portal. Second, this legislation will enable the Minister of Finance and President of the Treasury Board to issue directives requiring agencies to provide compensation information, including employment agreements and compensation policies, plans, programs, and studies. And third, Mr. Speaker, this legislation will provide notice to executives and agencies affected by compensation frameworks. By adopting this approach, we are ensuring that we respect current contracts to the extent possible, while also ensuring that public dollars are used responsibly. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear that this legislation will enable the government to set, limit, or otherwise govern the compensation of designated executives or designated members through the establishment of compensation frameworks. This could include setting limits on variable pay or severance entitlements. This is a reasonable, responsible, and proactive approach by the government to deliver fairness and transparency for the people of Alberta. Mr. Speaker, for the benefit of members present, I should add that this legislation will apply to APEGA agencies whose chief executive officers or equivalents have current base salaries over $200,000 per year, excluding post-secondary institutions. This approach to addressing executive compensation in ABCs is aligned with the broader review of agencies, boards, and commissions. As members will recall, the government is nearing completion of Phase 1 of the review, which applies to APEGA agencies, again excluding post-secondary institutions. And we announced in Budget 2016, Phase 1 of the review will lead to the amalgamation or dissolution of 26 agencies, boards, and commissions, saving $33 million over 3 years. Mr. Speaker, I want to re-emphasize that rather than implementing the frameworks immediately, there will be an interval between passing the legislation and introducing regulations to allow ministers accountable for the designated agencies to introduce the new approach, and to have conversations with the boards and agencies that will be affected by the new compensation framework. This interval will also include an opportunity for Albertans to review our compensation philosophy and provide further comments through the Government of Alberta website. And this interval will allow us time to consult with benchmarking professionals to ensure we get this right. Mr. Speaker, by moving forward with this legislation in the current session, we will have an aggressive but reasonable timeline for bringing consistency and fairness to executive compensation at public agencies. This is a priority for this government and for all Albertans. This is the right thing to do and the right time to do it. I ask this House for its support in moving this legislation forward, and I look forward to our discussion on this important bill. Thank you.
Hear, hear.